So we're in Luke chapter 15. That's on page 1049 of the Red Bibles. So Luke chapter 15, verse 11. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms round him, and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the elder son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called to one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The elder brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'"
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you today. If I've not met you before, my name is Micah. I'm one of the pastors here at the Gate Church. Please do say hello later. It'd be great to get to know you all. I know probably all of us are quite familiar with the idea of, like, especially with children and siblings, child siblings. There's a lot of squabbling and falling out, isn't there? But we kind of hope that as children grow up into adults, they kind of grow out of that. But do you know what one of the biggest causes of conflict and breakdown between grown-up siblings is? It's experiences of favoritism from parents. Or another one, the second most common, is the feeling of being made to compete against a sibling, being pitted against them in some way. I think there's maybe no clearer example of this sort of thing than, inheritance battles. Those really, really toxic things in an already messy and painful situation. Essentially, every murder mystery plot ever written revolves around a last-minute change of will, I think, doesn't it? But to maybe put it another way, at the heart of almost all serious sibling conflicts, there's this fractured relationship, first and foremost, not with the sibling, but actually with the parent. And this works both ways. How a parent treats their children reveals what they think about their child, or how they value them. But also, how a child treats a parent reveals what they ultimately care about as well. I mean, I realize quite quite a few years ago that I seemed to only call my dad when I was a student when I'd run out of money. And that's probably not a helpful or healthy attitude to have towards calling home. But what's interesting, though, is that whilst that understanding of family relationships is, I think, pretty universally considered as family gone wrong or gone in the wrong direction, it's not the way we want family to work. It is, quite often, the normal way to think about God around the world, isn't it? That we have to work hard in order to please him so that we can get things from him. Or that he might secretly have favorites. That maybe everything with him just feels like this kind of weird competition. In the passage that we read today, there definitely seemed to be an expectation that God should play favorites. You might, if you skip a little bit earlier, you'll notice in the first verse of our chapter, these words, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering round to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, 'This man welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" You see, that the reason that Jesus told the parable we've heard, and a couple of parables before, it's not actually a secret. It's a response to the kind of muttering from the crowd about the company that Jesus was keeping. The fact that Jesus wasn't just listened to by the worst of the worst, but that Jesus seemed to actually actively enjoy their company. And he was happy to be associated with them. It kind of went beyond guilt by association. It felt like a betrayal of everything that they'd held dear. These tax collectors were collaborators with an enemy-occupying army, the presence of which threatened their very identity as a unique people who belong to God. And that mention of sinners is referring to these kind of people who are guilty of like public or especially scandalous sins, the sort that mark you out in society as somehow spiritually dirty. In other words, Jesus seemed to be making a point of spending time with political, religious compromisers. And you can maybe understand then why people were wondering just what he was playing at. I mean, I want you to imagine maybe your response if, you go to your next family get-together and that cousin you haven't seen in a while introduces you to her new boyfriend. He's one of those, and you ask him what he does. He said, I call 1,000 numbers a day, and I try and con as many elderly people out of their life savings as I can. Okay, that's the kind of reaction that people would be getting from the company that Jesus was keeping. And you can maybe understand then why they were so concerned. Like, isn't he meant to be a holy man? And whatever way you look at it, these are not holy people. And actually, he's not put off by the muttering either. He disagrees with them about a lot of things, but he's in complete agreement on their status as sinners. In fact, the first two stories, he talks about lost sheep and lost coins to make the point, really, that these are people who are lost. But he also says things that are quite shocking in those parables. The first, in the first parable, he says in verse 7, "I tell you in that same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 who do not need to repent." I mean, you can get, really, why that's quite offensive, right? That's quite a strong thing to say, that there is greater joy in heaven about the worst of the worst coming in than about the 99 who never needed to say sorry. But don't worry, because Jesus actually goes kind of double or nothing in the next story, where he kind of tells the same sort of story as the last one with a key difference. You can see it in verse 10. It says, "In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." I wonder, have you ever wondered who's rejoicing there? Because according to Jesus, it's not the angels, okay? It's in the presence of the angels. Now, who lives in heaven but isn't an angel? It's God. The answer is God. And to be honest, if we're not shocked by that, then quite frankly, either I'm not doing my job right, or perhaps it's maybe just because of how powerfully the message of the prodigal son has shaped our society over the years. Quite frankly, regardless of what response we have this morning to this story, whichever way we react to the story we're going to walk through, both responses, whether it's horror or kind of like, nah, both of them speak to the power of the story of the prodigal son and the Christian story that has shaped our own culture, our thinking for centuries. If we were telling this story in communities that hadn't been formed by centuries of the message of Jesus, I think its point would have been unimaginable. It's worth pausing here, though, to remember that in saying these things, Jesus isn't excusing or making light of wicked behavior, the sort that is shown by too many people across history, across the globe. I think that as he tells this story, Jesus isn't minimizing what the Bible calls sin as much as he's maximizing it. He's not letting anybody off the hook. In fact, he's getting everybody on the hook. And the reason he does this isn't because he loves to be harsh, like he's some sort of like supersized Severus Snape or anything like that, but it's because the way that Jesus understands what sin is, and the way he understands what the answer to the problem of sin is, it goes far deeper, and it is far better news than we might have ever imagined. And we're going to see that in a moment in the next story that Jesus tells us. We're saying that this one is, again, it's very similar to the two we've already heard. There's lost things and found things, but there's some really important differences. Firstly, we're not dealing with sheep or coins anymore. We're dealing with people, okay, actual people. People who can make their own decisions, who are responsible for their own actions. But they're not just any old people, are they? They're family. They are the fundamental building blocks of every society, in every culture, across the whole world. They're like the atoms that build up society. And not just because they're about as basic a building block for communities as we can imagine, but also because when you break one apart, the damage can be unimaginable, can't it? And yet that is precisely what we see the younger brother doing within a single sentence of his being introduced. He says to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." This isn't just somebody being a little demanding or impolite. It is devastating. It is a slap in the face of a man who, out of love, has given his entire life to create something he can pass on to his children. For one of them to reduce that love to a financial amount, to a number, and then to have the audacity to demand it from him while his dad was still living. In Jesus' day and age, as well as today in many parts of the world, the younger brothers just made it really clear that he could not care less if his dad lived or died. He just wanted the cash. In fact, it would be more convenient for him, wouldn't it, if the dad would just do the decent thing and just kind of shuffle off this plane of existence so that everyone could get on with the really important job, which is dividing up what's left. And this sort of behavior, it's inexcusable. How is the dad meant to respond to that? I mean, how would you respond to that in that position? People have been written out of wills for less. But seemingly without any regard to the way he's been treated by his son or the way that he's been made to look in front of a society that took this sort of thing incredibly seriously, quietly, meekly, the father pulls out his checkbook and in a move that promises both a massive financial impact right then and in the future for him and his oldest son, he hands over the money to a son who has hated his dad with a cold indifference that it's almost painful to watch. You can imagine the scene, can't you? As the father kind of walks to the entrance of his property, watching his son waltz off into the sunset without once looking back, off to waste his newfound wealth. And waste it, he does. And maybe, if you're the sort of person who likes that sort of poetic justice, maybe you can't help but smile as the younger son's kind of stupid decision after stupid decision kind of rack up in the background until all at once, every poor choice he's made comes back to bite him. It just resonates with a sense of maybe justice, I think. There he is, no longer just morally bankrupt, he's financially bankrupt as well. There's not a penny to his name. He's envious of the pigs he's been employed to feed. To the Jewish listeners of his day and age, there wouldn't have been a lower job to imagine than that one. When suddenly the light bulb kind of switches on in his mind. Why is he working here? Why is he slowly starving to death when even the bottom rung staff at his father's farm have got food to spare? I mean, it is a risk. Maybe his dad might have been just as likely to kill him as to hire him. But in the pigsty, he can't really see any other option. And so off he goes, tail between his legs, stinking of pig poo, with his CV in his hand to his dad. It's hard not to imagine what Jesus' hearers are expecting here, isn't it? At last, here is the showdown that the story deserves. In fact, maybe the dad actually just handed the money over early because he knew that the kid would waste it and be back within a month. And then he'd teach him a lesson. Then he'd teach him something he wouldn't forget. But we don't get the Pharisees' version of the happy ending because it is rudely interrupted by the dad. He interrupts their version of the story because the last time we saw him, he's at the front gate watching his son leave. And here he is again at that front gate, and as the younger son gets his first glimpse of the family farm, it is immediately blotted out by the most undignified sight his hearers would have ever heard of. The dad, the head of the home, is kind of hoiked up his robes, he's hopped the gate, he's probably old, he's probably not meant to be hopping gates and running. It probably wasn't very respectful to look at. He's going too fast down the hill to notice maybe the muck he's treading in, maybe stumbling and falling. He wouldn't have seen that stuff anyway because his eyes are fixed on his son. He does not stop sprinting towards him until they collide. He is sobbing, covering his son with kisses. And kids, it's worth saying that if the sound of being publicly and repeatedly kissed by your dad feels a little bit embarrassing to you, I want to promise you that it would have actually been much more embarrassing for the dad in that day and age. Dignified, serious, important men, they didn't run. Children run, grown-up men didn't. And they certainly didn't welcome in this kind of person. They certainly didn't respond to the arrival of this shameful family secret by throwing a party to celebrate him and inviting the whole town. And forget the son bringing shame on the dad. It seemed like the dad has brought enough shame on himself. Do you know who else felt that way? The older brother. Because as he hears the sounds of a party and discovers the reason behind it, he is fuming. And he's angry not at his brother, first and foremost, but at his dad. Listen to the way he speaks to his dad when he comes to the field to plead with him to come into the party. He says, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." And with those words, the older brother reveals his true colors, doesn't he? It's not just the attitude he speaks with, but have you noticed what's important to him? It's not his dad, is it, after all? It's his dad's stuff again. His entire relationship with his dad has been expressed as following orders in exchange for wages. He sees his dad in exactly the same way his younger brother did. An obstacle between him and his money. And quite frankly, it didn't matter how obedient an employee the older brother had been, because whether you're in the field or whether you're in the pigsty, you are not in the party. In your mind's eye, I just want you to picture for a second the faces of Jesus' audience as they hear this story ending. Can you feel the way that it might land with them, what Jesus is saying? It doesn't matter how many rules they've kept. If they're relating to God as if he's maybe like a cross between a sort of genie and a temperamental CEO, then they couldn't have got things more backwards. Whether they're in the field or whether they're in the pigsty, they're not in the party. I don't know what kind of picture you might have of God in your head and what he's like this morning. Maybe it's the kind of, the cosmic policeman who's sort of like breathing down your neck, the one that kind of makes you feel a bit guilty just every time it's mentioned in conversation. Or maybe he's the lawyer who just feels like he's going to get you on some sort of technicality. But if your idea of God doesn't seem to have room for a dad who is desperate to have his kids join him in his home at his party, I just want to invite you this morning to share in that bigger, that better, that more beautiful perspective. I also don't know where you feel like you are this morning, whether your week has felt like a bit of a hard slog in the field, or whether you feel a bit stuck in the pigsty. But I want to say that actually the reason Jesus told this story wasn't just for those people who heard it then. There's an invite to us this morning to join in that celebration. And in those days, if something like this had happened, if a child had run away, if somebody had brought shame to the family name, it would have been the eldest son's job to go and find him and bring him back. But in this story, just like in so many stories of sibling conflict, the broken relationship the older son has with his dad has meant that he's got no desire to chase after his brother. In fact, when he talks about him, he can't even bring himself to refer to him as his brother. This son of yours. But Jesus tells this story with another character in mind. Another son of the Father. One who isn't content to work angrily in his dad's field, or even just to enjoy his dad's generosity while his idiot brother is out there stuck and lost. One who follows his brother out into the distant country, who gets waist deep into the muck of the pigsty so that he can carry his brother out and he can bring him home. As we close, I just want to draw us to, in a few chapters' time, Jesus getting in trouble again by inviting himself round to the home of a famous and hated tax collector. And again, people are muttering, he is going to be the guest of a sinner. Once again, Jesus, without apology, declares to this man and to everyone who would listen, the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. So as I close this morning, can I invite each of us to reflect on the invitation of this God? A God who wants to share not just his stuff, but himself. A father who pleads with his children to come back home and to come back into the feast. And a son who has come to find those who are stuck, who are lost, who can't find their way home. When we reflect on that invitation, as I pray for us. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you have loved us with a love that is seen as undignified and shameful in the eyes of the world, that you would not even spare your Son, who chose himself to face the indignity of the cross, the shame of death as a criminal, so that he might bring us to be with himself and to be with you. Would we reflect on that invitation? And would we come home to you, enjoy your feast, and rejoice in your loving kindness to us? Amen.